Hey everybody, today we're going to go over roll tables, and roll tables should be useful for anything that you maybe would have pre-rolled beforehand, like loot tables for enemies, random encounters, things that go bump in the night when your players are sleeping and supposed to be keeping watch, all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at how they actually work. So the first thing that we see when we create a new roll table is that there's a table name and a table description option, which are easy enough to guess what they do, but they provide the name for the roll table and a description. But keep in mind that both of these pieces of information are displayed in the chat message that you'll get when you roll one of these tables, unless you set it to be private. So maybe don't make the title or the description too informative, or your players might be able to start inferring the things that are coming if you accidentally send it to the public chat roll. Now, after that, we get to the roll table formula, and this takes a roll formula like we went over in part 8 of the basic series on rolling. The difference is you don't have to enter /roll beforehand here. If we enter a roll formula now and roll it, we'll get a message that there's no available results, which can be drawn from the table because, well, there are no results to draw from the table because we haven't added any yet. This will come up again later, so we'll chat about it a little bit more then. Next up is the draw with replacement option, which is checked by default. When that option is checked, it means that when an item is selected, if you were to roll again, it should still be an option. If you uncheck it, then the result will be locked and cannot be chosen until you reset the table or manually unlock it using the lock next to the result. Now, we haven't actually got to see any of this because we don't have any results, so let's go ahead and add our first options just to get a better idea of what all of this means. So to add an option, click the plus icon in the far left side of the table, and we'll see some result options pop up. We'll just enter some random filler text for now, and then we'll roll with draw replacement still checked and see that the option is there if we were to roll again. If we uncheck it, then we'll see visually that it can no longer be selected. If we run out of results, we'll get the same error message that we did earlier. We can click on the locks next to the result options to unlock them individually, or we can reset them to unlock them all at once. We can also click to lock a result if we want to guarantee that it won't be an option for an upcoming roll or to ever be an option again. We also have this display roll to chat option, which is checked by default. If we leave it checked, it shows up in the chat with a message containing the roll, the result, the description, and the table that it was drawn from. If we uncheck it, a message is still sent to the chat that says the result, the table was drawn from, and the description, but not the actual die roll. If you want to hide the actual message from your players, you'll need to change your roll type in the chat window to private GM roll or blind roll or self roll or something like that. With that checked, we can see the messages. The messages tell us who it is visible to, the table we drew it from, the roll, and the result. As we went over in the video on rolling, we can also right-click on any of our private rolls and click to reveal it to everyone if we want to. Now, before we get too far though, let's rewind back to the roll table formula section. It's set to 1d4 currently, but what if we changed it to be 1d5, even though there's only 4 options? If we do that, Foundry will never roll higher than the number of options we have. Now, what if we add a modifier to the roll like +4, where it's always going to send it out of bounds? We'll get the same error that we got earlier. We can use modifiers, but they're not particularly useful in tables because it just means the lower range of numbers will never be selected. Like, think if you had options in the 1 to 4 slots but had a +1 modifier, then the lowest result that you can get is actually a 2 because the lowest roll is a 1 + 1 is 2. You'll never get the result that's in the 1 slot just because it's impossible to roll that low. As a result, I can't really think of a use for having modifiers, but it's good to have options, and maybe y'all can think of an option or a reason to have it that way. Now, with the basics of roll formulas out of the way, we can look at how results are actually selected. Next to each selection, we have the weight and range options. The range describes what number must be rolled to get that result. Currently, each option can only be selected on a single number, which we can tell because the ranges are 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4, etc. But we can increase that. Let's say we want the first option to always be selected, so we give it a range of 1 to 4. If we roll, we can see that we get 2 results. We can have any number of overlapping results that we want. And I guess there's one situation where you wouldn't get 2 results. If you rolled a 1, then you'd only get the first one. But you can have any number of overlapping results that you want, so you could have multiple results returned from a single roll, which is really cool. Now, what about this weight option? This one is a little bit tricky. So the weight is basically how likely a result is to be chosen out of the maximum range, but it doesn't automatically update based on changes in the range field, so it's not always accurate if you're making changes that way. Our weight is currently set up to be 1 for each value, and if we want to get back to that, since we changed it to be 1 to 4 for the first option, we can click on the scale icon up here in the top far right, or middle far right actually, and it will automatically adjust all of our ranges and make sure our roll table formula is accurate. Let's see that a little bit more clearly by changing the roll formula to be 1d6 and clicking the scale again. This is pretty cool, and we can use it to change our range as well. If we wanted the first result to have a weight of 2, and we change that and click the scale again, we can see it changed our roll formula to be a 1d5 and changed the range for the first item to be 1 to 2 instead of 1 to 1. So there's now a 2 out of 5 chance that it will be selected, and each of the other options still have a 1 out of 5 chance because that's what their weight is set to. Now we can also update the weight for the other results, and the roll table formula will continue to update as well as the ranges for all the values. It's important to note, however, that the scale only makes changes based off of the weight. If we change other values and hit the scale again, it will overwrite them based on the weight values, and you cannot have overlapping roll results using the weighted formula. If you change weights, you're never going to have the overlapping results, so it might be worthwhile to set all of the weights and then go in and manually adjust the ranges to match whatever you want the overlapping values to be. Now that we know everything that we possibly can about the actual rolling system, what kind of things can we return from these tables other than just text? We've pretty much just taken a look at grabbing a handful of insults for vicious mockery, but roll tables can do a lot more for us than just that. So let's take a look at those results. The first one that we've already seen is text. It returns the text on the result detail field, and that's about it. We can put HTML in the text field though, to make it a little bit nicer looking, which is pretty neat. The next option are entities, and in Foundry, almost everything is an entity. If we click the drop down next to entity, we'll see that actors, items, scenes, journal entries, macros, roll tables themselves, and playlists are all entities. That means we can have a roll table return any of these types of entities, or even multiple types of entities, using the overlapping roll values that we looked at earlier. Now let's start with an actor just to show you how it would return any specific entity. So let's return this green slad by selecting actor from the dropdown and entering green slad as the value. Note that this is case sensitive. This must be entered using the entity's full name with case sensitivity in mind. So capitalize where there are capitals and lowercase where there are lowercases. When we hit update, we can see that the entity's icon shows up, and then we'll hit roll and we can see it pop up in the chat. The entity is also clickable to get its sheet, item info, etc. You can access any of the entities types by entering their name in the text box. Now let's look at when each entity type might be useful. But before we do that, let's keep in mind that these are for entities that are in the various tabs in the sidebar. So actors must be in the actors tab, and items must be in the items tab, etc. We'll take a look at grabbing entities out of compendia in just a moment. So for actors, use cases are things like randomly picking monsters for an encounter, rolling from a list of previously met NPCs to see who they find trapped in a jail cell, yada, yada, yada. Then we can jump over to items, and these could be useful for randomly rolling for loot, what a thief steals off of all of your players, the items a shop has available added, all kinds of things, what you find in a dragon horde. Then we can also pick from scenes. So this could be useful for picking from a collection of random encounters that you've created, picking the room that players are teleported to in a mage's tower if you have different scenes for each one of these. Those are all possible use cases. For journal entries, this could be randomly selecting NPC backstories. If you have a whole bunch of pre-written backstories, you could just randomly select one, or character traits or anything like that. It could also be random flavor descriptions when you're moving through a city or other location. For macros, this could be good for randomly selecting an effect to occur to your players, like teleportation, shrinking, or a spontaneous fireball. Random environmental effects like turning off all of the lights or torches or something like that. Then you can also return roll tables, and this can be useful for kind of determining what items they get in any given encounter. You could have uncommon, common, rare, legendary as their own separate tables that each one then has a list of items in. So you could roll the first table that would say, okay, they're going to get an uncommon item, and then it will roll the uncommon item table and return to the chat window whatever results come from that roll. Or if they wind up getting a legendary item, or it selects the legendary table, it will roll a legendary weapon or armor or something like that and return that to the chat result. So you can weight that so they're less likely to get legendary items, more likely to get uncommon, and you can basically automate all of your loot for all of your future encounters. You could also do something like encounter type, whether the random encounter they're about to experience in the woods is easy, medium, hard, or deadly. And they could all have their own actor results that are monsters for random encounters of varying difficulties and stuff like that. And then there's also playlists. And this would mostly be useful for calling from a macro, at least as far as I can tell, where you might have a few different soundboard playlists that it would grab from randomly, and then the macro would start playing the return playlist. Because as it stands, if you return a playlist result, it's just sent to the chat, but it isn't clickable or usable or anything like that. Could also be a cool feature suggestion. But now that we've gone over all the things that are already in the sidebar, let's take a look at rolling through compendiums, or compendia, my apologies. Did you know that the plural form of compendium is compendia? You should be very pedantic about this to your players. They'll love it, I guarantee it. Compendium rolling is actually a lot like rolling the other roll table options that we've already looked at. You can select any compendium in your world and grab specific values from them. So let's say we wanted to roll up a random class selector for what type of NPC our players are going to meet next. We could create one from the D&D 5e.classes compendium and enter a few values, which we can then roll. The result will pop up in chat, and we can click it for more information and then quickly come up with a backstory or something like that. Or use another roll table for random backstory generation. We can drag and drop the name onto the map, which will also add the actor to the Actors tab, where we can then draw out additional copies. Because if you kept dragging and dropping the actor from the chat box, you'd wind up with multiple copies of it in the Actors tab as it continually re-imports them from the compendium. And this would be good if you rolled a monster out of the compendium that you didn't have in your Actors tab, like this goblin, and we dragged it out, and then we kept dragging it out from the Actors table. That'd be the result that we wanted, but if we kept dragging it out from the chat box, you'll see that we'd have multiple copies in the Actor tab. Now, one last note here is that if you have your own compendia you've created in your world, it will also be available in this dropdown, but it's going to have this world dot prefix, as you can see here. And with that kind of taken care of, that covers just about everything that are in the basics for rollable tables, or roll tables rather. Hopefully that covers most of your use cases and gives you a valid example that you can draw from for anyone that you want to make in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys and gals in the next one. Thanks.